The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan as Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical scope. 3,000 feet below, his SEAL team had been pinned down for over 6 hours in what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. The Taliban fighters had turned their simple intel gathering into a deadly trap, and now 8 of America's finest warriors were fighting for their lives in a narrow valley with no clear escape route. Morrison had been positioned on the ridge since before dawn, part of an Overwatch detail that was meant to provide early warning and support fire if needed. What he hadn't expected was to become the last hope for his brothers trapped below. Through his scope, he could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions scattered across the opposite hillside, at least 40 fighters by his count, all focused on the small cluster of rocks where his team had taken cover. The radio crackled in his earpiece with the strained voice of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, the team leader who had guided them through dozens of successful missions over the past 2 years. Her voice carried the weight of command, but Morrison could detect the underlying concern that came with watching her people slowly run out of ammunition and options. Overwatch, this is Bravo Team. We need immediate support fire on grid coordinates 314 to 228. Multiple enemy positions on the eastern slope, distance approximately 800 meters from our location. Chen's voice remained steady despite the continuous crack of rifle fire echoing through the valley below. Morrison studied the terrain through his Leopold scope, identifying each enemy firing position with the methodical precision that had made him one of the Navy's most trusted long-range specialists. His rifle, a customized 13 Malawian Quachas Mod 7, had been zeroed perfectly that morning, and the wind conditions were nearly ideal for precision shooting. But the distance was extreme, even for someone with his skills, and the lives of his teammates hung in the balance with every shot he would take. The Taliban fighters had chosen their positions well, using natural rock formations and hastily constructed stone barriers to protect themselves while maintaining clear fields of fire down into the valley. They had obviously planned this ambush carefully, waiting for exactly the right moment to spring their trap. Morrison realized that this wasn't a random encounter, but a carefully orchestrated attack designed to eliminate an entire SEAL team. Through his scope, Morrison could see the lead Taliban commander, a tall man with a distinctive red headscarf who was directing the placement of his fighters with hand signals. The commander had positioned himself behind a large boulder roughly 900 meters away, far enough to feel safe from return fire, but close enough to maintain control of his forces. Morrison made the mental calculation instantly. Wind speed 2 miles per hour from the northwest, temperature 72 degrees, humidity low, altitude compensation needed for the extreme range. The first shot had to count. In sniper warfare, especially at these distances, missing the first target often meant alerting every enemy fighter to the presence of an Overwatch position. Morrison controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow as he entered the focused state that had kept him alive through countless similar situations. His finger found the trigger, applying pressure gradually while maintaining perfect sight alignment on the Taliban commander. The rifle's recoil was familiar and comforting, a sensation Morrison had experienced thousands of times in training and combat. Through his scope, he watched the commander drop instantly, the red headscarf disappearing behind the boulder as the sound of the shot echoed across the valley. The immediate effect was exactly what Morrison had hoped for. Confusion among the enemy ranks as fighters looked around frantically, trying to identify where the shot had come from. But Morrison didn't pause to admire his work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, working the bolt to chamber another round while his eyes scanned for the next priority target. He identified a machine gunner who had been pouring devastating fire down into his team's position, the muzzle flash clearly visible from behind a rocky outcrop, roughly 700 meters away. The second shot came 30 seconds after the first, and the machine gun fell silent immediately. Morrison could see his teammates beginning to take advantage of the reduced enemy fire, shifting positions to find better cover and returning more effective fire of their own. But there were still dozens of Taliban fighters scattered across the hillside, and Morrison knew that his position would be compromised soon if he continued firing from the same location. Professional snipers learn early in their training that mobility is survival. staying in one position too long, especially after taking multiple shots, is an invitation for return fire that can be devastating when it comes from multiple directions simultaneously. Morrison gathered his equipment quickly, slinging his rifle across his back, and moving to a secondary position he had identified earlier during his initial reconnaissance of the ridge. Morrison repositioned himself along the ridge to get a better angle on the narrow passage his team would need to traverse. The Taliban fighters had shown tactical intelligence throughout this engagement, and their attempt to establish a final ambush position demonstrated they understood exactly where the Americans needed to go. Through his scope, Morrison counted at least 12 enemy fighters moving into positions on both sides of the defile, armed with rifles and what appeared to be at least 2 rocket-propelled grenades. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. Morrison's elevated position gave him excellent visibility, but the angles were challenging due to the steep terrain and the way the Taliban fighters were using natural rock formations for concealment. Some of the enemy positions were almost directly below him, requiring shots at extreme downward angles that would test his ballistic calculations and shooting skills. His 10th shot targeted a fighter who was positioning an RPG launcher behind a cluster of boulders on the northern side of the passage. The range was 750 meters at a severe downward angle, requiring Morrison to compensate for both the gravitational effect on the bullet's trajectory and the altered ballistic performance when shooting at such steep angles. The shot found its target, eliminating the RPG threat before it could be brought to bear on his team. Chen's voice crackled through the radio with an update on their tactical situation. Overwatch, we can see multiple enemy positions in the passage ahead. We're going to need precise fire support to get through safely. Can you identify priority targets from your position? Morrison keyed his radio while maintaining his sight picture through the scope. Bravo team, I count 12 enemy fighters in ambush positions along your route. I can see 2 RPG positions, 1 eliminated, working on the second. Multiple rifle positions on both sides of the passage. Recommend you hold position until I can clear the immediate threats. The second RPG position was more challenging, located behind a large rock formation that provided excellent concealment from multiple angles. Morrison had to wait patiently for the fighter to expose enough of himself to present a viable target. Sniper warfare often required this kind of patience, waiting for the perfect moment when skill and opportunity converged to create a successful shot. When the Taliban fighter finally shifted position to get a better angle on the approaching SEALs, Morrison was ready. His 11th shot covered 820 meters and eliminated the second RPG threat before the weapon could be fired. The psychological impact on the remaining enemy fighters was immediate and visible, as several abandoned their positions and began retreating up the hillsides on both flanks. But Morrison's biggest challenge was yet to come. Through his scope, he identified a Taliban sniper who had taken position in a rocky outcrop roughly 1,000 meters away, armed with what appeared to be a Russian-made Dragunov rifle. The enemy sniper had chosen his position well, with excellent fields of fire covering the entire passage his team needed to traverse. This was a skilled marksman, not one of the typical fighters they had been engaging throughout the morning. The duel between the 2 snipers would require everything Morrison had learned during his years of training and combat experience. At this range, with the wind conditions and terrain features, both shooters were operating at the absolute limits of their equipment and skills. The first shot would likely determine the outcome, as both snipers would be able to identify the other's position once shots were fired. Morrison spent several minutes studying the enemy sniper's position through his scope, looking for any weakness or opportunity that might give him an advantage. The Taliban marksman was well concealed behind a natural rock formation, with only small portions of his rifle and scope visible from Morrison's angle. The shot would need to be perfect, threading between rock formations and finding its target across more than half a mile of mountainous terrain. The wind had shifted slightly since his previous shots, now coming from the east at approximately 3 miles per hour. Morrison made the mental calculations for windage, elevation, and the various environmental factors that could affect his bullet's path over such an extreme distance. His rifle was performing perfectly, but at this range, even minor variations in ammunition could mean the difference between success and failure. Morrison controlled his breathing and settled into his shooting position with the methodical precision that had made him one of the Navy's most trusted long-range specialists. Through his scope, he could see the enemy sniper making final adjustments to his own rifle, preparing to engage the American team as soon as they entered the passage. Time was running out, and Morrison's next shot would determine whether his teammates could safely complete their withdrawal. The 12th shot was the longest and most challenging of Morrison's career. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 full seconds before finding its target, covering the distance with the precision that separated professional military snipers from ordinary marksmen. Through his scope, Morrison watched the enemy sniper's rifle fall silent, the threat eliminated at the critical moment. With the sniper threat neutralized, Morrison turned his attention to the remaining Taliban fighters in the passage. Most had been demoralized by the accurate long-range fire and the elimination of their most skilled marksmen, but several were still in position to threaten his team's movement. His 13th and 14th shots cleared 2 more rifle positions, opening a corridor through which the SEALs could move with significantly reduced risk. Chen's voice came through the radio with barely controlled relief. "Overwatch, outstanding work. We can see the path is clear. Beginning movement to extraction point now. All personnel moving together with supporting fire from team weapons." Morrison watched through his scope as his 8 teammates moved through the passage in perfect tactical formation, each man covering specific sectors while advancing toward their extraction point. The remaining Taliban fighters offered only scattered and ineffective resistance, clearly demoralized by the devastating effectiveness of the long-range fire they had been receiving throughout the engagement. As his team moved through the final phase of their withdrawal, Morrison began planning his own extraction from the ridge. He had been in position for over 8 hours now, and his presence would soon be compromised as enemy forces realized where the devastating sniper fire had originated. Moving off the ridge would be dangerous, as Taliban reinforcements might already be moving to surround his position. The radio brought welcome news as Chun reported their safe arrival at the extraction point. "Overwatch, Bravo team is secure at extraction point. Helicopter is inbound. Estimated time of arrival 12 minutes. What's your status for extraction?" Morrison gathered his equipment while maintaining surveillance of the surrounding area through his scope. "Bravo team, I count fewer than 6 enemy fighters still in contact, scattered and disorganized. Beginning movement to secondary extraction point now. We'll rendezvous with helicopter at backup landing zone." The descent from the ridge required all of Morrison's fieldcraft skills, as he needed to move quickly while avoiding detection by any remaining enemy forces. The secondary extraction point was located roughly 2 kilometers from his firing position, accessible through a series of ravines and ridges that would provide concealment during his movement. As Morrison moved through the rocky terrain, he could hear the distant sound of rotor blades approaching from the east. The extraction helicopter was arriving exactly on schedule, a testament to the coordination and professionalism of the entire operation despite the unexpected enemy contact. His teammates would be safely airborne within minutes, their mission accomplished despite the Taliban ambush that had threatened to eliminate the entire team. The radio crackled with updates from the helicopter crew as they approached the primary extraction point. "Bravo team, this is Ghost Rider 2-1, approaching your location from the east. We can see smoke marking your position, preparing for immediate pickup." Morrison reached his secondary extraction point just as the helicopter was lifting off with his teammates safely aboard. From his new position, he could see the aircraft climbing rapidly away from the valley, its mission accomplished despite the intense enemy resistance they had encountered. His own extraction would come from a different helicopter approaching from the south, maintaining operational security by using multiple flight paths and landing zones. Through his scope, Morrison took one final look at the battlefield where he had spent the morning. The Taliban forces were already beginning to withdraw from the area, carrying their wounded and abandoning positions that had been methodically eliminated by precision rifle fire. The psychological impact of accurate long-range shooting had achieved exactly what Morrison had intended, breaking the enemy's will to fight and allowing his teammates to escape from what could have been a devastating trap. The sound of approaching rotor blades signaled the arrival of Morrison's extraction helicopter. As he prepared his equipment for pickup, He reflected on the engagement that had tested every aspect of his training and experience. 14 shots fired, 14 targets eliminated, 8 American lives saved through the precise application of sniper skills developed over years of dedicated training and combat operations. The helicopter settled into the landing zone with the practiced efficiency of an experienced crew who had conducted countless similar operations. Morrison gathered his rifle and equipment, moving toward the aircraft with the steady professionalism that marked him as one of the military's most trusted specialists. Within minutes, he would be airborne and heading back to base. Another successful mission completed through the deadly precision of a silent marksman on a distant ridge. The helicopter lifted off from the secondary extraction point with Morrison aboard, climbing rapidly to clear the mountain ridges that had provided both concealment and challenge during the morning's engagement. As the aircraft gained altitude, Morrison could see the entire battlefield spread out below him, the rocky terrain where his teammates had been pinned down now looking deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. The crew chief handed Morrison a headset so he could communicate with the pilot and co-pilot during the flight back to base. Captain Maria Rodriguez, the pilot, had been flying special operations missions for over 6 years and had developed a reputation for getting her passengers home safely regardless of the circumstances they faced. "Hell of a morning's work, Master Chief," Rodriguez said through the intercom. "The radio chatter from your team made it sound like you single-handedly broke up that ambush. 14 confirmed kills at those ranges is something most snipers never achieve in their entire careers." Morrison adjusted his headset while securing his rifle in the helicopter's weapon rack. "Just doing my job, Captain. The team did the hard work of staying alive while I had the easy job of shooting from a comfortable position with perfect fields of fire." Rodriguez smiled at Morrison's characteristic modesty, understanding that his calm professionalism masked the exceptional skill required to achieve what he had accomplished that morning. She had flown enough special operations personnel to recognize the difference between ordinary competence and the kind of expertise that saved lives in desperate situations. The flight back to forward operating base Shank would take approximately 45 minutes, giving Morrison time to decompress from the intense concentration required during extended sniper operations. The physiological effects of maintaining perfect focus for hours at a time were something most people never experienced, the combination of mental strain and physical control that left even experienced operators drained after successful missions. Through the helicopter's windows, Morrison could see the rugged landscape of eastern Afghanistan passing below, the same terrain where American forces had been conducting operations for over a decade. Each ridge and valley held stories of courage and sacrifice, places where ordinary men and women had achieved extraordinary things in defense of their teammates and their mission. The radio crackled with an update from the Base Operations Center. "Ghost Rider 2-2, this is Base Operations. Be advised that Bravo team has landed safely and all personnel are accounted for. Medical evaluation shows no serious injuries, just minor cuts and dehydration from extended time under fire." Morrison felt the tension he hadn't realized he was carrying finally begin to ease. The successful extraction of his teammates meant that the morning's mission, despite the unexpected enemy contact, had achieved its objectives without friendly casualties. In the dangerous world of special operations, missions where everyone came home alive were never taken for granted. Captain Rodriguez updated him on the tactical situation as they approached their base. "Intelligence reports indicate that Taliban forces in that area have been reinforced significantly over the past 2 weeks. What your team encountered was probably part of a larger operation designed to target American reconnaissance patrols." The implications were sobering. If the Taliban had been preparing coordinated ambushes for American forces, other teams could face similar situations in the coming weeks. Morrison's successful counter-sniper work had not only saved his teammates but had also provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and tactics in the region. As the helicopter began its approach to FOB Shank, Morrison could see the familiar layout of the base spread out below. The collection of buildings, vehicle parks, and defensive positions represented safety and support for the thousands of American and Allied personnel conducting operations throughout the region. After hours of operating alone on a mountainside with limited ammunition and no backup. The sight of the base was reassuring. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the helicopter landing zone, and Morrison gathered his equipment while the crew chief prepared to shut down the engines. The routine of post-mission procedures was familiar and comforting, a return to the ordered world of military operations after the chaos and uncertainty of combat. Lieutenant Commander Chun was waiting at the edge of the landing zone as Morrison walked away from the helicopter. Her expression combined relief at seeing him safely returned with the professional satisfaction of a mission commander whose people had all come home alive. Master Chief, I can't begin to express how grateful the entire team is for what you did today, Chun said as they walked toward the operations building. Without your Overwatch fire, we would have been completely overrun in that valley. Your shooting was absolutely phenomenal. Morrison appreciated the recognition from his team leader, but his mind was already shifting toward the lessons learned and improvements that could be made for future operations. Ma'am, we need to brief the intelligence section on what we observed today. The Taliban showed significantly better coordination and preparation than we've seen recently. This wasn't a chance encounter. They entered the operations center where the rest of Bravo team was completing their post-mission debriefing with intelligence analysts. The mood was subdued but positive, the relief of survival tempered by the professional requirement to extract every possible lesson from their experience. Each team member would provide detailed accounts of what they had observed, creating a comprehensive picture of enemy capabilities and tactics. The debriefing process would take several hours, with Morrison's account being particularly valuable due to his elevated position and clear observation of the entire engagement. His detailed notes on enemy positions, weapons, and tactics would help intelligence analysts understand how Taliban forces were adapting their strategies to counter American special operations capabilities. Sergeant First Class Tommy Wilson, the team's communications specialist, approached Morrison as the formal debriefing concluded. Master Chief, I just wanted to say thanks personally. When that machine gun opened up on us, I thought we were done for. Hearing that first shot from the ridge was like hearing the voice of God himself. Morrison shook hands with Wilson and the other team members as they prepared to return to their quarters for rest and equipment maintenance. The bonds forged during combat operations created relationships that went far beyond normal military camaraderie, connections based on shared danger and mutual dependence that would last for decades after their service ended. Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, requested a private meeting with Morrison to discuss the morning's engagement and its implications for future operations in the region. Patterson had commanded Special Operations Forces for over 15 years and understood both the tactical and strategic significance of what Morrison had accomplished. Master Chief, your actions today prevented what could have been a devastating loss for our forces in this region, Patterson said as they met in his office. 14 confirmed kills at those ranges, under those conditions, represents shooting that's literally off the charts for combat effectiveness. Morrison provided a detailed tactical assessment of the engagement, emphasizing the intelligence indicators that suggested increased Taliban coordination and preparation. His recommendations for future operations included enhanced overwatch positions, improved communications protocols, and adjusted patrol routes that would reduce vulnerability to similar ambushes. Patterson listened carefully to Morrison's assessment before sharing intelligence that had been gathered from other sources in the region. What you encountered today fits a pattern we've been seeing across eastern Afghanistan. Taliban forces have been receiving additional training and equipment specifically focused on countering our reconnaissance and direct action missions. The strategic implications were significant. Enhanced enemy capabilities meant that American forces would need to adapt their tactics and procedures to maintain their operational effectiveness. Morrison's successful counter-sniper work provided valuable insights into both the threats they faced and the capabilities required to overcome them. As the day concluded, Morrison returned to his quarters to clean and maintain his rifle, the routine care that kept his weapon functioning at the precision levels required for long-range shooting. The 13 Malawian Quachas Mod 7 had performed flawlessly during the morning's engagement, but proper maintenance was essential for continued reliability in the harsh conditions of Afghanistan. The cleaning process gave Morrison time to reflect on the engagement and the factors that had contributed to its successful outcome. Years of training, countless hours of practice, quality equipment, and favorable environmental conditions had all combined to create the precise shots that saved his teammates' lives. But, at its core, the success had depended on the fundamental skills and mindset that separated professional military snipers from ordinary marksmen. That evening, Morrison received word that his actions during the morning's engagement had been submitted for formal recognition. While he appreciated the acknowledgement, he knew that the real reward was simpler and more meaningful. 8 American warriors had returned safely to base, ready to continue their mission in defense of freedom and democracy. The mountains of Afghanistan would continue to challenge American forces with their harsh terrain and determined enemies. But men like Morrison, trained to the highest standards and equipped with the finest weapons, would continue to provide the precision and professionalism that kept their teammates alive and their mission successful. On a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, a silent marksman had once again demonstrated that individual skill and courage could change the outcome of any battle. As Morrison settled in for the night, he could hear the distant sound of helicopters bringing in supplies and personnel for the next day's operations. The war would continue, with new challenges and dangers that would test every aspect of their training and equipment. But today had been a good day, a day when everyone came home, and that was something worth remembering in a place where such outcomes were never guaranteed. The new firing position offered a slightly different angle on the enemy fighters, and Morrison used the brief respite to study the tactical situation more carefully. His team was still pinned down, but the elimination of the commander and machine gunner had clearly disrupted the enemy's coordination. Individual fighters were making poor decisions, exposing themselves as they tried to maintain their rate of fire without proper leadership or supporting weapons. Morrison's radio crackled again as Chin's voice provided a quick situation update. Overwatch, excellent work on those targets. We've got movement in the northwestern sector. Looks like they're trying to flank our position. Can you provide interdiction fire in that direction? Through his scope, Morrison could see exactly what Chun was referring to. A group of 6 Taliban fighters was moving along a narrow goat path that would eventually bring them to a position where they could attack the SEAL team from behind. The path was partially concealed by scrub vegetation, but Morrison had the elevation to see their movement clearly. The range was shorter than his previous shots, only about 600 meters, but the targets were moving and the angle was challenging. The third shot took down the lead fighter on the path, causing the others to scatter for cover among the rocks. But Morrison had anticipated their reaction, already shifting his aim to where he expected them to take refuge. The fourth and fifth shots came in rapid succession, eliminating 2 more fighters who had chosen predictable hiding spots behind inadequate cover. As Morrison worked his way methodically through the enemy positions, he could see the tactical situation beginning to shift in favor of his team. The Taliban fighters were losing their coordinated fire discipline, some abandoning their positions entirely, while others fired wildly without proper targets. The psychological effect of accurate long-range fire was something Morrison had witnessed many times before, but it never failed to demonstrate how individual skill could change the entire dynamic of a battle. The sun was climbing higher now, and Morrison knew that the heat would soon begin to affect his precision shooting. Rising air temperatures create thermal currents that can deflect bullets over long distances, and the rocky terrain below was already beginning to shimmer with heat waves. He needed to maintain his effectiveness while his team found a way to break contact and move to safer ground. Chen's voice came through his earpiece again, this time with a note of cautious optimism. Overwatch, we're seeing significant reduction in enemy fire. Preparing to bound back toward the extraction point in teams of 4. Can you provide covering fire during our movement? Morrison adjusted his position slightly to get a better view of the route his team would need to take. The path back to their extraction point was exposed for roughly 200 meters, crossing open ground that would leave them vulnerable to any remaining enemy fighters. He identified 3 positions where Taliban forces could still engage his team during their withdrawal, and began planning his shots accordingly. The radio brought another update from Chun. Overwatch, we're beginning movement in 30 seconds. For men moving first, covering fire from remaining personnel. Morrison watched through his scope as the first group of SEALs broke cover and began their bound toward better positions. As expected, enemy fighters immediately began engaging them from the positions Morrison had identified earlier. His sixth shot silenced a rifle that had been tracking one of his teammates, while his seventh eliminated a fighter who was preparing to throw a hand grenade at the moving group. The precision and timing required for this type of covering fire pushed Morrison's skills to their absolute limits. He was essentially conducting a deadly ballet, coordinating his shots with the movement of his teammates while maintaining awareness of threats across a wide area of terrain. Each shot had to be perfect, not just for accuracy, but for timing, ensuring that enemy threats were eliminated at exactly the moment they posed the greatest danger to his team. As the first group reached better cover, the second group prepared for their movement. Morrison could see that the remaining Taliban fighters were becoming increasingly desperate, taking greater risks to maintain their fire on the withdrawing Americans. This desperation worked in Morrison's favor, as fighters exposed themselves more frequently in their attempts to inflict casualties before the SEALs escaped entirely. The eighth and ninth shots came during the second group's movement, both finding their targets among fighters who had abandoned their cover in attempts to get better firing angles. Morrison's ammunition count was becoming a concern now, as he had started the mission with only 20 rounds in his magazine, plus 1 in the chamber. Each shot had to count not just for accuracy, but for conservation of his limited resources. Through his scope, Morrison could see his teammates reaching the rally point where they would consolidate before moving to the extraction zone. The enemy fire had decreased dramatically, but there were still active threats that needed to be eliminated before the team could move safely through the final phase of their withdrawal. The radio brought welcome news as Chin's voice reported their status. Overwatch. All personnel accounted for at Rally Point Alpha. We can see the extraction zone from here, but there are still active enemy positions along our route. Request continued support for final movement phase. Morrison studied the terrain between his team's current position and their extraction point through his scope. The route would take them through a narrow defile between two rocky hills, an ideal location for an ambush if any Taliban fighters had managed to reposition themselves during the engagement. He could see movement among the rocks on both sides of the passage, confirming that enemy forces were indeed attempting to set up a final trap for the withdrawing Americans.